Welcome to the Tactical Dent Tech Podcast. You are now part of a small underground movement of dent technicians from all over the world. We are on a mission to change our industry with innovation, intelligence, and skill. But because we don't rely on an insurance company to steer customers our way, we need to do things different. We need to do things smarter. We do that through a network of technicians that we call the Tactical Tech Movement. Now let's get this revolution started. Hey, what's up, everybody? John Hiley here with Angela Hiley on the Tactical Dent Tech Podcast. So I hope everybody's doing well out there today. And this is going to be a Marketing Monday podcast. Ooh, but we're going to get a little bit in depth because I think I've talked to you guys in the past about how essentially individual behind the business, when you begin putting a personality behind the company, you're going to 10x your business. Because this day and age, I mean, you really don't trust just a logo anymore, okay? You see it in a lot of businesses right now. A lot of people are using influencer marketing, which I used, and I've been used for influencer marketing. Well, not used. I'm obliged to do it because usually I get a free tool out of it. But that being said, it's one of them things where, and that's kind of how, I'm going to take a step back. That's kind of why I've literally made a few enemies out there, because I have had certain tools sent to me that I will not test, that I will not review, or put my name behind it because I don't like them. And what's most important to me out there is that I give you guys information and I tell you guys things that I would actually do. Because there was one time I made a mistake and I got so excited when I seen this one specific tool, and this was probably about 5 years ago. But I was so excited. It was a pretty big, item, and it got sent to me, and without testing it, I reviewed it.
Yeah.
And to find out that it was the biggest piece of shit that I'd ever used, and people did contact me too. They were like, dude, I bought that because you told me it was good, right?
Oh, and then here it wasn't.
Yeah, but it looked so cool and it seemed, but sometimes the functionality of things, and then later on I learned the company who brought it out, which they're not around anymore, but they weren't big into functionality. They were more into a cool look and a cool feel, but then when it came to functionality and field testing, it was just, there was nothing there. So that being said, long story short, something I want to talk about today is that when you put an individual behind a business, okay, or let's say when you put yourself behind your business and you begin to become the face of your business, and you put a person, a face, and you attach that to your business with, the right type of personality behind it, you can definitely 10x your business, okay? Meaning that when people, they don't really associate you with just a logo anymore. They associate your business with you and you with your business, okay? And in all honesty, in the paintless dent removal realm, most people are not building a scalable business that they're going to sell to somebody at one point. Now, you may take your business, you may sell it to another dent technician, you may sell it to somebody you train. I don't know. I've heard stories of that, but I've heard more stories of people who just end up retiring and their business kind of just fades out, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not a big sellable item. I mean, when literally whenever you look at, for instance, Shark Tank, I think we've all watched Shark Tank, but one of the first things that the investors will look at is the business quickly scalable? And when you have a business that's quickly scalable, it basically means that you're able to hire less expensive labor, train them quickly, be able to handle a turnover, and pretty much all the things that paintless dent removal is not, okay? So again, we go right back into the aspect of you being the face behind your business. In the grand scheme of things, I think for most dent technicians, it's a good thing rather than a bad thing, okay? Now, I have heard big, Fortune 500 companies and stuff like that who have had to scale back from one individual being the face of the business because when they go to sell it, investors get involved, stuff like that. The motherfucker dies or does something stupid, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're in a lot of trouble. I mean, we got Jared from Subway, right?
Yeah.
That fucker fucked up and did something really bad, and now, Subway had to totally disown him, right?
Yeah.
So, but anyhow, jumping back onto the perspective, what I want to talk about here today is how, a lot of people are like, well, I want to be the face of my business, but I don't look like a dipshit. I don't want to go out there and say the wrong thing, I think it all really boils down to just one aspect of your personality, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that aspect of your personality that you really have to work on harnessing, because I think everybody has issues with this at some point. Everybody doesn't really understand it, and that's why I think this is such an important podcast. And this is why I want to cover this aspect, because it's one of them things that we feel inside, we don't talk about, and I just don't think a lot of people really understand it. And what that is, the difference between being significance-driven and value-driven, okay? Because just about everything that you do in your business is going to be driven from one or the other. It's going to have that look, okay? And I'm going to give you guys an example here, and I'm going to give you guys a real-world example of how you can either create a massive following with people in your own community who know, like, and trust you, or you can create a bunch of people in your community that are indifferent to you and really just may not even like you, right? Mm-hmm. And that all breaks down to, again, that's significant driven versus value driven. So significant driven, I know a lot of you guys are probably around my age or maybe even older. Some of you guys are younger, but we're all in general probably around the 30s, 40s, 50s range.
Yeah.
I'd say in general, the bulk of the audience is. So a lot of you guys remember the WWF or the WWE now that it is, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you would see this contrast. Somebody I'm going to bring up is Hulk Hogan and Iron Sheik, okay? Now, Hulk Hogan knew he was a bad motherfucker, right?
Yeah.
He did. I mean, he stood up there, no doubt. He knew he was a bad motherfucker. But what was the biggest key that was driven? He wasn't self-centered. It wasn't his character, okay? I know him probably in person or whatever. I'm just talking about his character was not self-centered. It was all about the Hulkamaniacs.
Yeah.
And it was all about him being the force of one.
Yeah.
And every little kid, including me, myself, dreamed of being this big motherfucker.
Yeah.
That was like the force of all. He came out with the American flag, and he was just, giant dude. He was kicking ass. He was always on the brink of failure and had major comebacks, just everything that a hero actually does, all right? And what he was projecting during that time was being very, very value-driven, meaning that he was giving value to many more people. There was a lot of people seeing themselves as him, vicariously living through his battles, as most little kids do with superheroes.
Yeah.
And there's probably a good handful of adults that grew up living through them as well.
And still do.
There's still probably a decent amount of Hulkamaniacs out there. All right. And yeah. So, but I want you guys to contrast that with somebody like the Iron Sheik, okay? So the Iron Sheik came out and all he did was ridicule people. And he brought focus directly back on himself. He brought focus on his accomplishments. He just talked about them all of the time. And he talked about how he was worldwide known. Everybody knew the Iron Sheik. He was very, very significance driven. And that's what caused him to be the perfect villain.
Was he arrogant?
Very arrogant, very significance driven. And I want to say that, guys, we all know people that we've gotten conversations. I mean, have you ever ran into somebody who just drives you fucking crazy with that bullshit? Like, oh, well, and they always turn the subject back on themselves. Like, if you're in a conversation with them, everything that you say in their mind, it has something to do with them personally. So they absorb everything that you're saying to them. They don't relate, they don't conversate, but they say, oh, well, then they just turn it into a story about themselves.
Yeah.
Them are people who are very, very significance driven. And the problem with that is that it's it literally is on all honesty, it's being insecure. The moment that you have to remind people over and over again of how significant you are, you've actually got to tell them. You've got to bring the light back on yourself. You've got to bring the conversation back to yourself. You've got to point the light on you. You're insecure. Yeah, it's like the whole thing. It's like, who are you really trying to prove this to?
Yeah.
You're not trying to prove it to the people around you, because a secure person, like who is value driven, is just going to understand. They bring enough value to the world. They bring enough value to people around them that it's not very comfortable to even have people praise you, you know, because you're so focused on bringing value to the world and the people around you. Okay. So there's a big difference. And I'm telling you guys that literally anybody who's super, super significant driven is to stay away from them, to get away from them. You know, you want to surround yourself with people that are value driven, that take the focus off themselves and focus on giving value to other people, you know? And that being said, just as an individual in a community, whether it's the online dent removal community, whether it's the, your actual community, the more value that you can give to your community and people around you, the more you're going to be respected by others. All right. So now there's a time where you got to talk about your accomplishments. There's a time when you've got to, but you brief on them. And a lot of times you guys will hear me on my webinars and stuff like that. Like, I understand, human emotion and what it takes to get people to connect with you, And one of the things is when you do state your accomplishments, you always go, but it wasn't always that way.
Yeah.
And then you go into your story, the hard times, like what you went through, because that's really when you're going to connect. You're never really going to connect with people when you're per se bragging about yourself. Yeah. Where you connect with people is on the hard times, the story that led you to where you're at today. I know all of us have one. I know you guys out there, everybody has some sort of fucking horrible story that or something that they had to overcome to get to where they're at today and now. What I'd recommend is, as an individual, is cultivating that story and putting that story in your message, because that's what's going to bring the real connection. That's what's going to cause people to say, it's going to cause people to remember you. It's going to cause people to remember your story. And they're not going to be like, God, that asshole just wouldn't shut up.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the people who live that significance-driven life where, here's the difference. They're always, all day long, they're thinking, oh, how can I get the light shining on me? Oh, what could I do to make people, they're thinking they're just me, right? And when you're a value-driven person, you think, what can I give to the world today?
Yeah.
Without any strings attached, and just having faith that it's going to elevate you to the next level. And it takes faith to be value-driven. To be significant-driven, it just takes kind of selfishness, really, is ultimately what it takes. So no matter what you do, even, guys, if you go back to like Greg McAfee, for instance, I had him on one of our old podcasts. It was a John and Tom podcast. It was probably the episode in between 1 and 10. I know it wasn't 1, but, it was later on. It was probably 7, 8, 10 or something like that. And you guys can go check that out. That podcast is still out there. But on that podcast, we had Greg on there, and he had a compelling story. The guy owns the largest heating and air conditioning company in the Midwest. It's a massive operation, but his whole story is driven by him. And it's driven by his story of like having, was it like $230 some in a truck? And he has an entire story, like what he started with, how much money he had, the job that he lost, the faith that nobody had in him. He only had faith in himself. Everybody around him was to the point to where they're just like he literally gets fired from a heating and air conditioning job and then goes and opens up a heating and air conditioning company.
Yeah.
And if you could imagine being a young fella at that time, your family, your mother, father, your ex-employer, coming to you going, what the hell are you thinking, dude? Go get another job.
Yeah.
Dude, you just got fired from being a heating and air conditioning person. I think he ended up buying that company, by the way, eventually.
Really?
Yeah, so the guy who fired him, he ended up buying the company out.
That's interesting.
But long story short, he talks about how he didn't like school, and he, which is a compelling part of the story, and it has a relatability to it. You actually find your vulnerable side has more relatable things to it than your guarded side, if that makes a sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense, that guarded side where you're always like, well, I don't know if I want to say that shit. If I say I didn't like school, I'm going to piss off all the teachers in my community. And you start overthinking like who you're going to piss off when you say things, when probably your fucking teachers would get up and say, well, I hate school too. I hate it now. I teach here, right?
Yeah, right.
And you ultimately, like, you disable yourself when you do not allow yourself to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is like a superpower. And I will tell you, it took me a long time to learn that. And I didn't feel like I was really preaching my message until I began to become vulnerable and put myself out there and just say the things that I'd been holding back. And in all honesty, I felt like I was living with all these skeletons in my closet that I hadn't told anybody about, including, you guys know, in one of my previous podcasts, I talked about how early on I was convicted of a felony of trafficking LSD. And, it's back whenever John was only, he was just being born at the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was like 18 years ago now. And, that was something I felt like, I was like, man, that's a horrible skeleton that I had in my closet, and I didn't realize that when I told that story, people came out from far and wide saying, dude, that took a lot of courage. They see courage in that, right? And then also so many people knew
it was also very relatable.
Very relatable. And other people had been in similar situations.
Yeah.
It's like your powers in that story. Like, I stood up on the stage at Dayton Social Media in front of this whole community and told that story.
Yeah.
And I had literally more people walk up to me after the event and during the event than any of the speakers there. Okay. And then on top of that, I had more speakers talk about my story during their stories than anybody else. My story, anybody who was there when they heard it, every single speaker cited that was actually there when they heard it.
Yeah, especially Brian Vanzo.
Yeah, up until Brian Vanzo. And you guys know he's a good friend of ours. He's on one of our been on one of our podcasts here, and he was just on me and Wasfi's podcast.
We need to get him back on here again.
Yeah, the Tactical Mentors podcast. So, and we became very close friends with him, and that was all from becoming vulnerable. And if I wouldn't have done that, if I would have just been, the type of person who just went up there and told the very, very least about myself,
it would have been good, but it wouldn't have been
memorable.
Exactly.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been memorable. And I mean, that's the thing that you guys got to think about. All right. So did it hurt me in business? Absolutely not. It excelled my business. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way things are. It's like the biggest mind fuck ever.
That's like when
the one thing you think that's going to hurt you the worst is actually your superpower.
That's like when we went to that jewelry store. There was a gentleman that did their their advertising or something of that. He's like, hey, John,
they started treating me like in this fancy jewelry store that sells Rolexes like I was a damn what would you, like a celebrity or some shit.
I guess, but he was just like, yeah, I was there at Dayton Social and listened to you speak. And
he's like, man, I didn't even realize you lived around here. And I shit you not, we didn't even have to wait. And I bought literally something that would be very, very inexpensive at that jewelry store. I mean, it was probably one of the least expensive watches that they had. But I went in there because they got these new G-Shock watches.
Yeah.
And I wanted to try one out. So I bought, which is not super inexpensive, but it was, I think the normal price was $600, but they brought it down to like $500 for me. And it's like this carbon fiber face G-Shock watch. It's pretty bitchin', dude. It's been like my favorite watch I've ever had. And, but anyhow, long story short, like I didn't feel like we really waited that long, but they gave her a pair of diamond earrings for waiting.
Yeah, but you stood there and talked to those two guys probably for a good 45, 50 minutes about just advertising and Instagram and this and that. And I mean, they just wouldn't shut up. It just kept going and going.
Yeah, she basically had to drag me out of there. And but anyhow, that just goes to say that like it didn't hurt me at all by telling my story. In fact, it empowers you when you get deeper into the bad parts. And you got to focus on that, man. And I know what it is, man. Like there's so many people that think that they've got to focus on their self being significant And that's a quick way to be very, very insignificant. It's a very fast track for people not to like you because nobody wants to be around an arrogant prick. And that's really what you become when you start focusing on yourself.
Yeah.
So if you do at some point have to give your qualifications, follow it up with, but it wasn't always that way.
Yeah.
And talk about the hard times. Spend like literally maybe 2% of your time talking about your qualifications and then drill home the hard times, you know, and let people know what you overcame to get to where you're at, because that's going to be more valuable than you potentially bragging about yourself.
Well, yeah, and it also makes a lot of people feel more comfortable.
Absolutely. You know, a real quick quote to bounce off this podcast is I think your dad actually told me this one time.
Really?
And yeah, it was the difference between heaven and hell. And I kind of believe that on this earth, we have a little bit of both, you know, we have a little bit of both types of people. So in that regard, just by the story alone that your dad had told me one time, it kind of displays that. And he said in hell, it's like sitting at this big table with all of this food to feast on. Kind of like, you know, what we have here. We got this world that we have this big table with all of this amazing stuff that we could be feasting on,
So
right?
just think of like Thanksgiving or Christmas.
Like Thanksgiving, right? But you have these giant utensils, like they're like the size of shovels or some shit, right? So you really can't grab the food, you know, to eat them. So everybody in hell is just sitting there so pissed off. They're looking at each other and they're like, fuck you, you know, whatever, you know, I guess we just won't eat. And then you switch to heaven and everybody's feeding each other. So they realize they got these big utensils and they can't eat the food themselves because it's just so damn big. So they step back and they start feeding each other.
Yeah.
You know, and I really think that kind of like concretes the message that I'm trying to drive home today, is that literally the significant driven people, they only care about themselves, you know, and it's a very, very selfish way to live. It's hard to be that person. Like, I feel sorry for them. I'm getting to the point, guys, where the more that when I see certain people like do things that are very, very rude, like there was somebody who made a horrible comment on a post and I just totally ignored it. And years ago, or maybe even months ago, I would have got on there and just thrashed them. And it was very, very negative. It was very, very, it came from a very, very strong point of fear. But now I look at that and I feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, this dude like is, yeah, you know, and there's nothing I can say or do about it, you know, but I really feel sorry for the mental space the individual has to live with day to day. And it's kind of the way that I feel about people who are super significant driven. It's like they don't really understand how bad that is to be selfish day in and day out, not only on a feeling level, but just an energy level. And the ends never justify the means, because what they really want will never come to them, because the way they're going about it is appalling.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So, you know, if you do want significance, focus on helping other people. Okay? It's just this, I just believe there's a learning lesson for everything in this world. And the learning lesson is almost the exact, do the exact opposite is usually what it is.
Yeah.
If you want something so bad this way, do the exact opposite to get it.
Remember, we're all fluffy bunnies just trying to work through our issues.
Even me. So anyhow, y'all, I appreciate you guys for this podcast. I hope this hits home for some of you guys.
Yeah.
And again, that's a Marketing Monday there for you. So if you're thinking about becoming the face of your business, don't even worry about your mistakes. Don't worry about your errors when you get on there. People love that shit. Like
They do, because they can totally relate.
Yeah, especially if you're doing it by live video. But just get on there and be you. Bring you.
Be yourself.
You know, and, you know, ease your way into it. Don't expect anything magical to happen overnight. And keep working at it.
Yeah, keep plugging away.
Become the face of your business, guys. All right. We'll see you on that next one.
And remember, it's all about the hustle.
Pew, pew.
Bang, bang.